I'm David Martin Davies, and coming up on The Source, in a historic turn at the United Nations this week, Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa delivered his first address to the General Assembly, the first Syrian head of state to do so in nearly 60 years. A year ago, the U.S. had a bounty on his head. This week, he met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Al-Sharaa used the global stage to call for an end to sanctions, pledge justice for past abuses, and invite Syria back to the diplomatic fold. The speech matters deeply. From terrorist to rebel to now statesman, what can we expect from al-Sharaa's transformation? David Lesch joins us, Trinity University expert on the Middle East, Syria, and conflict resolution, and the subject of a new biography, Dodgers to Damascus. This is a community conversation. We want to hear from you. Call in at 833-877-8255. That's what's coming up on The Source. But first, this news.
Support for The Source podcast comes from UT Health San Antonio, South Texas' largest academic research institution, where what is discovered in its labs translates into life-changing patient care. More at uthealthsa.org.
Are you ready to amplify your impact through workplace giving? Many employers match donations, doubling or even tripling your support for TPR's local and global programming. Some employers even match gifts from retirees and spouses, so your contribution can go even further. Check if your company participates today by visiting tpr.org/workplacegiving.
Live from the John L. Santico studio in downtown San Antonio, this is The Source from Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. Syria sits at the very heart of the Middle East, and what happens there reverberates far beyond its borders. The country is surrounded by some of the region's most critical players, Turkey to the north, Israel and Lebanon to the west, and Iraq to the east. For more than a decade, Syria has been torn apart by civil war, foreign intervention, and humanitarian catastrophes. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime has opened a new and uncertain chapter, raising questions about whether the country can rebuild after years of violence and displacement. Why does Syria matter? Because if peace and stability can take hold there, then it could reshape the balance of power across the Middle East and provide hope for the world. The prospect of a more secure Syria offers a glimmer of hope that reconciliation, reconstruction, and cooperation might ripple through the region. And today we look at Syria's crossroads. And we're joined by one of the West's most recognized experts on Syria, the Middle East, and conflict resolution, David Lesch. There is a new biography about David called Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's Journey from Baseball to the Middle East. It's written by Catherine Nixon Cooke, and it's published by Trinity University Press. And David, welcome back to The Source. It's been too long.
Yeah, it has been. Great to see you, David.
Yeah, so we do want to talk about your biography, but, I really want to dig into what's happening with Syria. And we had an incredible week for Syria at the United Nations. What did we see?
Well, we saw a charm offensive by the new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, and he's in a difficult position in Syria because the country, 90% of the population is under the poverty line. The economy is totally dilapidated after 15 years of destructive civil war and withering international sanctions. So he has to get all of these sanctions lifted. He met with President Trump in Saudi Arabia during the summer, and President Trump promised to lift the sanctions. There's still some congressional action needed for the sanctions to be properly lifted. There's also, an infrastructure has to be rebuilt in Syria. So even when the sanctions are totally lifted and investment and reconstruction funds come in, that there's mechanism to bring all of that to the fore and reconstruct the country. So it's he needs the approval of the international community. And to a large extent, he's gotten it. I mean, in fact, although one scholar friend of mine said that he probably has more external legitimacy than internal legitimacy, there's still some questions internally. But externally, international relations, he's tried to redesign the image of Syria, reframe the image of him, because as we all know, he was a former al-Qaeda terrorist with a bounty on his head. And so he's done a pretty good job internationally of doing that.
So we're coming up on just a year that the Assad regime fell. It was December 8th of last year. So not a whole lot of time. And in that time, you said the United States had a bounty on Ahmed al-Shara's head. And he had gone from terrorist to rebel to now diplomat, or, and it's trying to be a stabilizing force. So a lot of people, I guess, at the United Nations, a lot of world leaders are still trying to take a measure of him and saying, is this an act? Is he putting on a show, or is he for real?
That's the question right now. It's the $100,000 question. I mean, we've seen a number of so-called terrorists. That's been, people have been labeled terrorists by international police organizations such as Interpol. We saw, Yasser Arafat, who was an international terrorist, become the president of the Palestinian Authority.
It was like General Petraeus did an interview with him, and they were enemies. They were at the other shooting at each other.
Oh, exactly. And we had a couple of Israeli leaders, Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, who were labeled by Interpol international terrorists, and they became prime ministers, and successful ones to a good degree from their perspective, their partisan perspective in Israel. So it can happen, the transition, but it's really, really difficult. And we've seen it throughout history that those who come to power, with military force, and now they have to rule. They have to rule over a settled society. They're responsible for stability. They're responsible for security and safety. And they have to rein in their followers who help bring them to power. And so this is that the Israelis actually, in general terms right now, they have questions about him. They think his turn toward pragmatism, his everything he said about wanting an inclusive Syria.
He wanted to respect the rights of everyone, he said.
Yeah, exactly. And the Israelis think that this is a tactical maneuver, that he and his father, that he will revert to his jihadist roots at some point. But there are others who think that his pragmatic turn is very real. In fact, one organization with which I've worked quite a bit, a European NGO, has known him for about 10 years. And as I kid them, I tell them they picked the right horse because he's the one that got the power, And they say, and they're very sure about this, that he is much more of a pragmatist now, and maybe even more of an opportunist, which is not necessarily a bad thing, which means he'll be what he has to be in order to stay in power, which means now he must be pragmatic. He must call for an inclusive Syria politically. But there are a lot of warning signs right now, and the jury is still out on him.
So when he trades in his battle fatigues for the tailored Armani suits and goes to the UN and speaks all of these, flowery words, and here we are, we want to move forward, let's forget about the past, let's talk about the future. And you have to wonder, how does this play back home?
Yeah, back home there are some who like this. Certainly the minority groups in Syria, like the Alawites and the Christians and the Druze and the Kurds, who want that inclusive type of Syria where they are treated equally with the dominant Sunni Muslim Arab population. They like hearing that. They hope that it's real. They hope that, deeds match words. But there are followers of his, these hardcore jihadists, and they are there in Syria, the guys that helped bring him to power and defeat the regime and military of Bashar al-Assad. They're rankled a little bit. They don't necessarily want to see this. They don't want to see negotiations with the Israelis or the Americans making concessions to the Israelis. They may understand why, but it's anathema to them. And so, Ahmed al-Shara is in kind of a conundrum, so to speak. He has to portray to the world and to elements in his own population that he is pragmatic now, that he has changed, that he has evolved from the Salafist jihadist that he used to be. And on the other hand, he has to satisfy that core group of Harakat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, who were formerly Al-Qaeda. He has to satisfy that core group that helped bring him to power and not go too far where they may turn against him. And I really think at some point he's going to have to, this is President Ahmed al-Shara, have a reckoning. If he wants to continue in terms of external legitimacy and internal legitimacy with the entire population, he's going to have a reckoning with this Salafist jihadist group at some point. Reminds me of in Saudi Arabia at the time. Maybe we can talk about that, a story similar.
Okay, we'll pick up from there. Our phone lines are open. You can call in if you've got questions, comments, thoughts about what's happening in Syria. What does this mean for the Middle East? Of course, Israel is a big player in here. We can talk about conflict resolution, what that might look like. We just had a new peace plan, a ceasefire plan proposed by Donald Trump and Israel. What does that look like, and how does that fit into this? 833-877-8255, 833-TPR Talk. Jose, I'm going to get you on the air as soon as we come back from this 1-minute break. Stay with us. This is The Source.
Support for this podcast of The Source comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company. They are committed to helping policyholders build strong and thriving businesses through their exceptional service. More at texasmutual.com/TexansDeliver. Texas Mutual.
You're listening to The Source on Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. Dodgers to Damascus, David Lesch's journey from baseball to the Middle East. It's a biography of David, written by Catherine Nixon Cooke from Trinity University Press. Before he was the international scholar of Syria and Middle East and an expert on conflict resolution. I guess you knew how to throw a baseball or something like that.
I tried. It seems like another lifetime ago. But I actually had a low 90s fastball, which back then, 40 years ago, meant something. Now everybody throws like 95 to 100 miles an hour.
And no one can hit.
And no one can hit. That's right. I know. But all these pitchers have Tommy John surgery because they're stressing their arms so much. But, my short career was riddled with injury, and finally the rotator cuff ended what I'm sure would have been a great major league career if I had gone in that direction.
Right. So David Lesch is the Ewan Halsell Distinguished Professor of History at Trinity University. He specializes in Middle East history and politics. He's a prolific author, 18 books and publications on the region. He is known for his work on Syria, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and the U.S. role in the Middle East, and we're talking about that this afternoon. You can call in 833-877-8255. Let's go to Jose. Jose, you've been hanging on too long, but you're on the air now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sounds like an interesting book I may need to read. In any case, I've been watching December 8th. It came as a shock to me. I am pro-resistance, and I've been watching the Syrian conflict from its inception. I have a vested interest because I lost a member to Al-Qaeda. And I lost a dear family member to Al-Qaeda. And I'm aware of where Jilani comes from. And I'm aware of the dirty war that we waged against Syria and the Syrians, not just the Syrian government, but the Syrian people. And what the public is not aware of is the massacres that ensued soon after Jilani took over. The massacre of 30,000 Alawites and Christians and Druze population. Now, what I see here is Jilani as being another Bin Laden, because when I see his eyes, I see blowback waiting to happen. Now, my question is this to David: we're witnessing, we're about to see Iran attack a war between Iran and Israel again. All right, and I expect Israel to be weakened from this. Where do you see Syria with a weakened Israel? Because I don't see Israel sustaining this type of conflict in the future. I don't see Israel in the future. What do you think?
All right, Jose, thank you for that. So first off, let's test that assumption that there is a imminent war between Israel and Iran or Iraq or who?
Yeah. Thank you, Jose, for your question. Just for the audience, Jose's reference to al-Jilani was his nom de guerre, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, before he changed his name back to Ahmed al-Sharaa when he became president. And he adopted that name to sound like a Syrian nationalist when he was with al-Qaeda, because it's a reference to the Golan Heights, Jilani. But in any event, certainly the gloves have been taken off between Israel and Iran, It used to be that there was no way they're actually going to attack Iran, but they did, and they're poised to do so again if they think Iran is starting to develop a nuclear capacity again. Israel right now is maybe at its peak strength ever in the Middle East. It can do and is doing almost pretty much anything it wants, and
including bomb Syria,
including bombing Syria, including Lebanon, including Qatar when it went after some Hamas leaders, and of course bombing Iran itself. So to Jose's point, if you've reached your peak, you can only go kind of downhill from there. And sometimes you may think that Israel's taken on too many fronts, but they are in this post-October 7, 2023 bunker mentality. Of course, that's the date when Hamas invaded Israel, and 1,200 Israelis were killed and 250 hostages, et cetera. And then you had the Israeli very, very intense, heavy response that's still going on. But they have very much a bunker mentality. That was Pearl Harbor to them. And so they want to create these buffer zones in Lebanon and Syria and anywhere in order to make sure, and in the Gaza Strip, in order to make sure that the perceived enemy is far away and cannot hurt Israel again. So again, this was to Israelis, their Pearl Harbor. And despite the opposition to many of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's policies, particularly his military policies, overall, the Israeli public, certainly the Jewish 80% of the Israeli public that's Jewish, there's a consensus in support, generally, maybe not the tactics, but generally of Benjamin Netanyahu's security policy.
So let's talk about this deal that President Donald Trump unveiled recently with Netanyahu, 20-point peace plan. They're saying they're trying to end the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza, and the plan calls for an immediate ceasefire, full prisoner hostage exchange, a phased withdrawal of Israeli forces, and a demilitarization of Hamas, and also creating that buffer zone. So it seems like there's a lot of promise there, but there's really I don't see why Hamas would take this deal.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost certainly the critics of it immediately have come out and said it's a deal that's meant to fail. This
is the third deal that Donald Trump has come up with.
And the bottom line is that Hamas is not going to negotiate its way out of existence. They still feel they can have a presence, and they're not going to give up everything that they feel they've established over the decades in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere. So, they're not going to. I don't see them agreeing to this. I see them actually, stalling and agreeing to parts of it. Netanyahu, I think, came out of it with what he wanted, in that he didn't upset Donald Trump too much by saying, no, I won't do this. He was saying, what a great plan, President Trump, et cetera.
Here's your peace prize.
Yeah, exactly. Here's your peace
prize.
But it's not going to happen, though.
There's no peace. And so then, Netanyahu can say, we tried.
Yeah, we tried, and it was Hamas that said no, And so I have he's going to continue to go after Hamas. I believe him when he says he wants to eliminate Hamas, and at whatever cost. And this is the most far right-wing government in Israeli history, and there are certain members of his government that threaten to leave the coalition, that will call on new elections if Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't, if he makes the concessions that they do not want in any sort of deal with Hamas. So I really don't see this going anywhere. I hope it does. I mean, I been surprised in the past, but I really don't see it advancing too far.
Let's go to another caller. Our number, 833-877-8255, 833-TPR-TALK. If you want to join our conversation about what is happening in Syria and the Middle East, let's go to Mike. And Mike, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. First off, go Tigers. Okay. Now, how do the Syrian people feel about the terrible cruelty that was put onto the prisoners, those presses that would crush people to death? Is there a reaction among them? Are they appalled by what happened, or were they okay with it?
So you're talking about the people under Assad?
Right.
Okay.
They were prisoners.
All right.
His countrymen.
Yes. So So David, so I'm going to go quickly back to what Jose mentioned really quickly, and see if that, and just tell me if that really happened. He said there were massacres after they took over and they expelled Assad, and that did happen.
Yeah, I would probably quibble with the numbers that Jose gave. I think he said 30,000, and there are reports from various different groups on how many were killed. But of course, back in March, there was violence in the Alawite areas in the northwest when Alawite groups, of course, the Alawites were the minority sect that from which the Assads emerged, and they had been in power for decades, of course, and that they carried out some violence against government troops, and then there was a disproportionate response from the government and its allies who were not really under control of the government against the Alawites. In July, there was something similar that happened in the Druze, again, another minority Muslim sect, and
some of these Muslims don't even consider them Muslims.
Oh, exactly. Certainly the Salafi jihadists, they do not think that Alawites and Druze are Muslim. Some do not think they deserve to live, frankly. I was very involved in the Syrian civil war and various conflict resolution and initiatives and negotiations. And I remember one Sunni opposition militia leader with whom I spoke. And, one of the concerns from the West at the time, during the civil war was what's going to happen to the minorities if you guys win, if the opposition wins, which is largely dominated by Sunni Muslim and increasingly conservative Sunni Muslim. And he just quite flat out told me about the Alawites, we'll kill them all. And he said, one of the things that he hated the worst was when he encountered an Alawite brigade. And he hated that because they knew they were going to kill them all, so they would fight to the death. Whereas if it was a Sunni-dominated brigade or military unit under in the Assad army, they may give up sooner. So this is a very real issue and a problem. And Syrians themselves, speaking to the next question, they're not only worried about internal violence, sectarian violence, because this is what happens. When the state breaks down, people retreat into their sectarian forces. And Syria is a tremendously fragmented and militarized state. There's militias all over the place, not all of them under control of the government. In fact, most of them probably not under control of the government. It became a narco state with private drug mafias and their own militias. So all of this is this boiling pot right now, and Ahmad Sharaa has to deal with this. Now, most Syrians, I think, they're so weary of war and civil war. They're willing to give him a long learning curve. They're willing to give him some rope, hopefully not to hang himself with, but to hopefully bring about
bind the wounds,
to bind the wounds and heal this country. So I think he probably has a longer learning curve than someone else in this position. And there's this Lebanese scholar by the name of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, and he talks about his own country, Lebanon, which, as you know, went through couple decades of civil war themselves. And he said that sometimes there's such destruction, such deprivation and degradation and suffering that people, even though there are all these differences, they say, we've had enough. And they'll make compromises that maybe they normally would not make in another type of situation. And maybe Syria has reached that point. We can only hope that it is anti-fragile through the toughening, so to speak, of 15 years of civil war and the need to get over the suffering from those in the prisons. And most of the people in Syria, they didn't like that at all. They rebelled against it, most Syrians. Only those that were part of the Syrian government and engaged in this sort of activity were for that or felt it was needed and useful. But by far the majority of the population disgusted with it, especially with the extent of the torture and the number of deaths that had been found out once the prisons were liberated following the fall of Assad.
And Syria is not right now a democracy. Didn't they call a 5-year period for them to try and stabilize, and they're going to try to get to democracy, or are they just switching out dictators?
That's a big question. In fact, he just called for legislative parliamentary elections, and a committee chose essentially 2/3 of those who were eligible to run in the election, and then he and his close group of supporters chose the other third. So that doesn't really sound like representative democracy. In fact, it sounds very much like how the Assads ran things. Now, I understand. I mean, he wants a centralized government. I understand he feels the need to have the control, the reins of power. Sure. But, that it's certainly not a democracy yet.
Right. But we'll talk more about that when we come back. We've got a lot more questions to talk about what's happening in Syria. We want to get more about what's happening on the ground with the people. 833-877-8255, 833-TPR Talk for you to join our conversation about what's happening in Syria as they are dealing with a new government. Possibly it's a new peace, but what's it look like moving forward? This is The Source on Texas Public Radio. This is The Source on Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. Dodgers to Damascus. David Lesch's journey from baseball to the Middle East. A biography of David from Trinity University. It's written by Catherine Nixon Cooke. She also wrote a great biography of Tom Slick, who was a fascinating San Antonio character. Everyone should know a little bit about Tom Slick. But right now we're talking about Syria and this country that's at a really important part of the Middle East. Of course, it was a dictatorship, a brutal dictatorship by the Assad family. They fell on December 8th. They were able to expel Assad, and we had a new government take over. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa. He was at the General Assembly at the United Nations just this week, speaking about what he wanted to do, how he wants to bring peace and prosperity to his war-torn country. But is that even possible? Many people are wondering, can he do it? It would certainly, it's against the odds. But people are hopeful. You can call in with your questions and comments, 833-877-8255. David Lesch is an expert on Syria, Middle East, and conflict resolution. So, David, when you look at Syria today, what are the core conflicts that we should be looking at? They have the regime opposition, we have Kurdish autonomy, there are some remnants of ISIS still running around, regional proxy wars, there's this criminal economy and the war economy. How are they going to all come together? How will they find some type of peace?
I think it comes down to the economy. They have to right the ship at some point, and it'll be based on getting reconstruction funds and investment in the country. The lifting of sanctions that President Trump announced during the summer in his meeting in Saudi Arabia with Ahmed Sharaa will help a great deal. But it's going to take a lot of time. There's already been some investment by some of the Gulf Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. But a lot of these investments, they're done not only to help Syria, but to position themselves. They don't want Iran to come back. Turkey, of course, is maybe the dominant external power in Syria right now. And there's a little bit of tug of war between Turkey and the Gulf Arab states in terms of positioning in Syria. So if all of this aid and help and investment is simply based on positioning, it becomes kind of an economic proxy war, when during the Civil War it was more of a military proxy war from all these different groups that, even though they support the opposition, they had different agendas. So, there has to be some sort of coordinated step-by-step process in Syria. And if the economy gets going, it means the people get paid. It means the military gets paid. It means the civil servants, they can hire them and bring people back. The refugees that left Syria will become a little more attractive, so they can come back with their skill set and their capital and help fuel, a rebirth of Syria. But there's a long way to go. But it all comes down, in my view, to the economy. You get that going, people are a lot less unhappy, and the sectarian strife, the ethnic strife that still exists in Syria and has existed and was only kept in a bottle by military dictatorship, and now it's unleashed. Maybe that will subside to a certain degree. And this is the thing that people have to remember, is that not only does Syria need to be physically rehabilitated and the reconstruction of Syria physically, but you need the emotional reconstruction of Syria. These people have been traumatized. It's a traumatized population that have been living through 15 years of horror and a lot more distress and disappointment to endure in the near future. So, you need programs that help build trust again in the government. You need programs to help build trust at the village level, village to village, town to town. And they will need help from the international community. They'll need help from international NGOs, the United Nations, and countries surrounding them to help Syria get back on its feet and not only physically reconstruct itself, but also mentally and emotionally.
One thing I look at the story of Syria and the fall of Assad, and it's interesting to see how regimes fall. And they had the civil war that had been going on for 15 years and it was brutal. It seemed just was nonstop. No one saw the immediate fall of Assad. It happened so quickly, and then he fled to Russia. His last 24 hours was he told people that he was still in the palace, although he had already left the country, but still almost ready to come back if things settled down. And he was expecting Russia, Iraq, and also Hamas, and even his own troops to save the day, but no one did. No one stepped up. They all held back. What happened?
Well, it was surprising to everybody, including me, including Ahmed Sharaa and HTS-led opposition. When they launched their offensive in late November, early December, it was called Operation Deter Aggression. It was meant to only push back Syrian government forces, back toward Aleppo and away from the northwest Idlib province where HTS was headquartered. They had no idea and no intention really at first to take all of Syria. But so weak was Assad's army that it just fell, and the opposition just continued to go on until they took Damascus. But Assad waited too long. In fact, I wrote an article soon after that where, he could have made a deal with the opposition. As early as 2017-18, the UN was trying to negotiate where he probably would lose some power, but he would have still been in power when the opposition was weakened at that point and not united as they were.
What kind of deal? What would it?
It would be a power sharing where maybe term limits on the president, bring more Sunni Arab opposition into the government, and
wasn't there so much already crystallized anger against the regime that people would not go along with it?
Well, the thing is that Assad didn't want to go along with it. Again, he didn't want to negotiate his way out of power. He didn't want to dilute power. He was not interested in the end, in my view, in reconciliation. He was interested in punishment and securing power, and not opening up the government to those forces. He didn't listen to the people. The people in Syria became empowered with the absence of the state during the civil war. And so they were never going to go back to business as usual. They were never going to go back to the authoritarianism of Assad. And at the end of the day, he had a broken down car and only a few seats in the car, and no one was willing to fight for and keep this broken down car, this situation that was exclusive to those who were in power. And in the end, they just, even those under his power, his own army, they said, forget it.
So where is he now?
He's in Moscow right now with his family and some other supporters, and apparently, from what I heard from a close confidant recently, as you know, he was an ophthalmologist before he became president in his unlikely path to become president of Syria.
Like an eye doctor.
Eye doctor, yeah, exactly. And he was a legitimate eye doctor, and he was studying and to get the equivalent of board certified in London when his brother died in 1994, who was originally tabbed to succeed his father, Hafiz al-Assad. And but when he died, the brother died, Bashar was brought back. And
so
now,
in the book, he says that he wanted to come back, and his father tried to talk him out of it. And and so that's counter to what most people thought happened.
Yeah, we wonder if that is that a constructed narrative to make it look like he's someone that didn't.
I didn't
want
him to
power.
have to be a dictator.
I know exactly.
But,
that I was convinced or ever. But what's interesting is that he's, from what I heard, is that he wants to be an ophthalmologist again in Moscow. So
how would he do that?
I don't know. He has to study a lot because I'm sure he told me one time, of course, as you know, I met with Bashar al-Assad a great deal between 2004 and 2009. He told me that he keeps up with the ophthalmological journals or whatever they're called. And so maybe he has to be certified again in Moscow. But that's really his first love. He always told me that's his first love.
Well, the problem is that Putin doesn't want to see him. Maybe he can fix Putin's eyes, but it's because he is a reminder to Putin about how fragile and how quickly things can turn.
Yeah, they again, from what I understand, Putin has put the clamps on him in giving interviews. There have been a lot of people that want to do an interview with Bashar al-Assad, like what's he doing, his view of the story, and some rather famous interviewers and shows have been in contact with me asking, can I get in touch with him? I can through other people, but to try to interview him. But Putin has put the screws on him because they really don't want him to say anything that might embarrass the Russians, perhaps.
So what did Russia lose by the fall of the Assad regime? They had this port and a base in Syria on the Mediterranean that would seem to be very valuable to them. What's the status?
Well, they're still trying to negotiate their way to keeping those bases that you mentioned. And as of now, they have a reduced presence, but they still have pretty much what they had, particularly in the north near Latakia. It's an Air Force base where Assad actually was taken, and he flew out of there to Moscow. They're trying to maintain some relationship with Damascus. Ahmad Shara has met with Putin, has met with Russian officials, and it's not going to ever be, at least in the near term, back to the way it was. Certainly with the reconstruction need and the investment from the West and from pro-West countries in the Arab Gulf, he needs to maintain a good relationship with the West, that is the president of Syria. So, it's Putin and Russia, they lost a lot. They lost an area of ingress and a loss of prestige because, one of their guys was overthrown, and they were not able to or unwilling to save him in the end.
Well, Trump seems to like him. He's a tough guy. I like a tough guy.
And a good-looking guy. He said he's a good-looking guy.
He's a good-looking guy. He's a tough guy. So yeah. So that's good for him. The reality TV part of the equation.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. So we're going to take a break here. If you've got a question or comment about what is happening in Syria, can there be peace? Can it be lasting? Well, what would it mean for the region? Why should we care? The number is 833-877-8255, 833-TPR-TALK, and the source continues. David Lesch's journey from baseball to the Middle East. His book is Dodgers to Damascus, a biography of David, talking about how he was a ball player, a minor league ball player, almost made it to the majors. He had an injury and sidelined him, but then he took up international diplomacy. He went for something not as hard as baseball,
Oh, no. International diplomacy is much harder. It's much less straightforward, let me tell you.
More curveballs.
Exactly. There, good point.
All right, but we're talking about that. You can call in as we're talking about Syria, an area that he's an expert in, the Middle East and conflict resolution, 833-877-8255. So you have worked with multiple presidents, talking about advising them on what's happening in Syria and the Middle East, and including Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And you worked with them on a journalist, Austin Tice. Talk about that.
Sure. Austin Tice was a freelance journalist, then working for the Washington Post, freelance photojournalist. And he went missing in Syria in August 2012, and he's been missing ever since. And his parents, Mark and Deborah Tice out of Houston, they contacted me about a year after that because they heard about my contacts and network in Syria and so forth, particularly with Bashar al-Assad. And I've been working with them ever since. In fact, we just communicated with each other, and Deborah Tice is quoted in the biography. And they're amazing, amazing people. And the government, U.S. government, has been trying to find out the status of Austin Tice ever since, and I've worked closely with what's called the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, which was a government department created by the Obama administration dedicated to trying to find out about hostages all over the world, not just Syria. And I worked with the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, fairly closely on trying to find out about Austin and getting him back if he could be located, if he was alive and could be located. and all information that from U.S. intelligence and other sources said that that he could very well be alive. There was no clear evidence that he was not alive, and certainly the few contacts and back channel contacts we had with the Syrian government, they were negotiating as if he was alive. Now I know there's question about that now, but on one occasion I remember I was at a workshop in Washington, and in that workshop was someone who had worked with the Trump administration. We were talking about access to President Trump himself, and he told me, David, the best way to get access is not like go through the National Security Council or the State Department. It's, on this subject, get on the Tucker Carlson show. And so I told Deborah Tice, who had established a vast network within the national press, can you through your network, can you get on the Tucker Carlson show? And so she did.
The idea is that Donald Trump watches.
Because he watches Tucker Carlson religiously. This is when he has a show on Fox. And she went on and pleaded with, President Trump to help. And man, he got to it. And we all helped. I helped a little bit in him writing a letter that he sent to Bashar al-Assad. And he had a press conference. And so that was a time where we got close.
But you helped him craft a letter in the way that don't blame Assad, right. Just ask him for help. Exactly.
Don't blame the Assad regime, although we were pretty certain that he held him, or a one-off of the regime held him. Just ask for his help in locating him, and the letter was sent to Assad, and Assad, it's a lot more nuanced than this, but did not respond for about 2 weeks, and so that was a mistake on Assad's part. In that you have the attention of the U.S. president for just that snap, especially someone like Donald Trump, who I think he changes subject quite frequently, very mercurial in that sense. So when you have the attention of the president of the United States, you better respond right away and maybe negotiate. Maybe you can get some concessions. But it got lost, this letter, in the labyrinth of the foreign policy and foreign ministry apparatus in Syria, and there was not a quick response. So that was, again, a lost opportunity of the many, many attempts we've made to get information about Austin.
And he worked with the Biden administration? He was definitely working on trying to get a hostage.
Absolutely. In fact, Mark and Deborah Tice met with President Biden, and there, again, more and more attempts. There were administration officials. The SPIHA, the Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, met secretly with Assad regime officials. They always denied having him and didn't know where he was. There's some thought that maybe he had been long dead, and therefore the Syrians are basically saying, yes, that's the truth. We don't have him. We don't know where he is. But again, I think the family and many of the supporters of the family and others, in lieu of evidence to the contrary, that he maybe still be held somewhere in Syria by perhaps remnants of the Assad regime who are holding him in seclusion.
Let's go to caller. Let's go to Sandra. And Sandra, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, what is the most positive actions we can take to help move towards a more democratic government in Syria?
All right. And Sandra, thank you for that question. And then when we get done with that, how do we do that here?
Physician heal thyself, right?
Yeah, so I think that's the problem. It's hard for us to advocate for human rights and democracy abroad anymore.
Yeah, it is difficult when we're having our own issues regarding that, because we're not, in some people's perspectives, we're not the model that we used to be in that regard. But with regard to Syria, we have to support at the grassroots level various groups, youth groups, business groups, others in the opposition, even those that were supporters of Bashar al-Assad, who have been promoters of democracy and tried to bring democracy to Syria, and also keep the fire burning with regard to Ahmed al-Sharaa, and that we will only support him and move forward with regard to the lifting of sanctions and encouraging foreign investment and reconstruction funds if he makes progress toward democracy. And it's always this question in U.S. foreign policy forever, ever since World War II and especially during the Cold War. Do we support democratic movements or do we support authoritarian leaders who kowtow to the United States? And we've tended to go in the latter direction because democracy takes too long. It's very messy. And during that process, other countries may come in at the expense of the United States. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union. And so, we've tried at times to get away from that. But, it turns out that sometimes when we encourage democratic movements in countries and democracies to come into place, people get elected that we don't like, or parties get elected that we don't like. And so either you go in that direction and accept the outcome no matter what it is, or you just drop the pretense and say, well, we're going to support, authoritarian leaders who support the United States. And so we may have that same dilemma with regard to Syria.
So they're having parliamentary elections. Is it this week?
Soon.
October 5th?
Yeah. So is that this week?
Yeah.
I forget where we are. Yeah, exactly. And, again, as we said earlier, we'll see how that works. I mean, who's voting? Do Syrian refugees, the millions who are outside of Syria, do they have a vote? Again, this was a pared down, sanctioned list by the current government of Syria. So,
and then how much authority would the parliament actually have?
Exactly. Probably very little.
Right. So trying to stabilize the region, particularly with Israel, given that Israel has already bombed Syria several times in the recent past, weapons depot and other things. How important is it to try and, stabilize, come to some sort of agreement? I mean, that's not going to play very well with the local population. It comes to his fundamental question of how do you maintain legitimacy and power and still find a way to talk to the people that are kind of your enemies.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered the question in the beginning when you said, look who borders Syria. Some very important countries in the region. Turkey
has never been more significant.
Exactly.
Right now. It's a big player with Ukraine and also on the other side in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And, of course, I think
Kurds.
they're the most dominant outside regional power in Syria right now. Of course, you have Iraq, you have Jordan, you have Israel, you have Lebanon. And so Syria was often called the keystone to the arch, way back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And if that keystone fell, the region itself could implode because it's a matter of geography. You just look at Syria bordering all these countries, and if it implodes and there's instability and so forth, what happens is you have the Turkeys of the world and the Israels of the world. To an extent, they've already done this, but they'll go even further to secure their interests as well as other outside powers. And then you may have this whole proxy instability civil war all over again that we've just seen for the last 15 years. So it's very, very important that there be some security and stability. I think the regime in Damascus sees that it has to get the Israelis off their back. They're going to probably make concessions to the Israelis, but the question is, how will other Syrians see that? Israel is not necessarily the bogeyman that to many Syrians as it used to be in the past. I mean, the generations of Syrians grew up with Israel being perceived as the enemy. They took the Golan Heights in the 1967 war, and that was a total injustice to most Syrians. But now, this new generation, the last two generations, it's not Israel that's so much out there. Again, it's in the Golan Heights, it's the civil war. That's what shaped their political consciousness and
a lot of
awareness.
that was driven by foreign interference.
Exactly.
And so if we just kind of limit that, or I don't know.
Somehow limit that where Syrians maybe can own their own lives and see their own future.
And their history.
And their own history.
An incredible history.
It is. And it's so much to offer.
All right. Well, David Lesch, the biography about him is Dodgers to Damascus. David Lesch's journey from baseball to the Middle East. It was written by Catherine Nixon Cooke. It's published by Trinity University Press. And he's got many of his own books you can read at your leisure, about the history, the politics, the conflict resolution. David, thank you so much for talking to us.
Pleasure, as always.
That's The Source on Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. Thanks for listening.
This has been The Source on Texas Public Radio. The Source is hosted by David Martin Davies. Tim Gutierrez is the show's producer. Additional production support from Steve Short, Ruben Garcia, Yvette Benavides, and Dan Katz, Vice President of News. The Source is made possible with support from the Gladys and Ralph Lazarus Foundation.